What up, what up, what up? What up, what up? All right, y'all. Getting ready to pull up. We in chapter 12. Oh my goodness. We are almost done, okay? I mean, we gonna be done in the next week or so, straight up. And then I can get back to my life. Um, yeah. Familia, what it do? It's your girl. Was talking healthy food. So before I get into this Instagram video that I'm about to show you about these racist ass neighbors that they got here, um, what I'm gonna ask y'all is like what I'm gonna start another channel. I ain't gonna tell you what it is yet, but it is gonna be like another side of myself and kind of focus on that. So what in the chat or hit me up on the gram. What other content would you like to see on that channel? I would love to hear your insights so I could kind of like cater to what it is that you want to see. And then, as of course, I will announce that channel because I need to do something different to kind of break the algorithm, if you will. Okay. Um, so let me know, it's going to be like a softer side, more of a girly side of myself, just kind of showing you some of my feminine wows, if you will. Yeah, so let me know. I would love to hear it. Okay. Now, before we get into the book, I wanted to show you this video because it's so close to home, and it's just like, well, what I call home now, rather. It's a video that I saw on the gram. So I'm gonna read this to you and then I'm gonna show the video, right? So here's a message from the girl. She says that we are in Owensboro, Kentucky. My mom has been owning her property for 11 years. For almost 10 years, we have been racially harassed, threatened, and blocked from entering and exiting my mom's parking lot by the tenants next door. Tenants, by the way, okay? 2015, the owner of the house next door, Brad Hutchins, brought in another set of racist tenants, Melissa and Michael Martin and their family, who also racially harassed, threatened, blocked us from entering and exiting my mom's property. Due to this, I decided not to go to college and stay back and help her. Now, I don't know why she would decide that, but I'm gonna show you the video. And it's so crazy. And it says the questions on here, what he got in the thing, how would you react to this? And I'm like, it's Kentucky. You can blast that fool. Anyway, but then we got the Klan out here too. So you don't want those problems either. The Klan is very, very real out here. So hold on real quick. Do it again! Do it again! Do it again! Do it again! Oh yeah, baby. Both they think so. Go ahead, baby. Come on, go ahead, baby. Go ahead, baby. Go ahead. Go ahead. You're the one, baby. I said, come on, baby. I ain't shit. I ain't shit. She called the police. We got niggers over there. Shut up, you stupid hoe. Like I'm gonna come over there. Your dumb ass won't come over here. You dumb bitch. Shut the fuck up, hoe. I am. You're good. You look like big dumb. I am. I don't care. All black. All black. Oh, do it, please. Do it. Let's be him up. Be him up. Here, back up, back. Let me Mm-mm.
I love nigger. Oh, nigger. It's so fucking played out pathetic. That's all you motherfuckers can do. Is hire racist, holler racial slur. Today we will talk about top 10.
So that's deep, right? That's fucking deep. And listen, I'm telling you, I don't want to say too much, but I'm gonna say this. Out this bitch, they will switch up on you. Okay? They will switch up on your ass so quick that I'm telling you. But I don't know how she could sit up there and deal with that for 10, 11 years. Like, girl, bye. How would I deal with that? Bitch, soon as you start crossing that property line and my right to bear arms, your ass would have got blasted. And that's it. You're not about to just be sitting up there harassing me. I bet you them hoes would have thought twice. And that's one of my fears with wanting to own property and shit is running across those kind of white folks because I don't know if I would be able to control myself. So it's having me to reconsider realistically, okay? So anyways, I don't know. Y'all let me know how y'all would react to that because I don't think it would end too well for me. Uh, that's the answer to the question that he posted on the gram. And that's just keeping it a buck 52 plus motherfucking tax. Okay. Um, so yeah, no, not my mom dudes. I'm telling you, not my mom dudes. And it's five of us. It would have been five black motherfuckers on their ass. And that little fence wouldn't have stopped nothing. That's all I'm saying. It ain't a threat. It's a guarantee. Just saying. That's why I want to stay somewhere where you could bear arms, okay? And I'm about to give me some new shit. That's all I'm trying to say. Um, so anyway, let's get right into the book. Okay. I don't really got any other news, but let's see what we find out here today. And per usual, we're gonna learn about it, see how it affects us in real time, and what we can do to be proactive in our health decisions going forward, based off the knowledge in the history, in the racist history. Um, in the medical industry. And as we know and as we learn, they're really not taught to, and this really backs up the theory that doctors are not taught to cure, they're taught to treat symptoms. And a lot of the symptoms that a lot of these doctors believe um, is based off of pure, unadulterated racism. So it's not funny, but I laugh. I'm laughing to keep from crying. What's up? So let's go live on here. And I'm not going to be live on here for long because these fools going to have to start coming to YouTube. That's all I got to say about that. So those on the gram, y'all better enjoy it now and bring your asses to Real Talking Healthy Food on YouTube. And if you're just now participating, let me know, watch my last post, and let me know what other content you would like to see coming from your girl. Okay. So this is called Genetic Predation, the Rise of Molecular Bias. Deep. In the age of the technological fix. Now, this is from Jonathan Beckwith. And let me block the numbers here because I get to watching the numbers and who's staying and who's going. And I don't I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on the book. Okay. Because if they leave, they come and go. I can't give a fuck about that. My content is not for everybody. Um, and I'm cool with that. I tend to see that people like the ratchet shit a little bit more. So I don't go digging for gossip and shit like that because I don't give a fuck about celebrities because they don't give a fuck about me or you. So moving on. Um, Jonathan Beckwith, 1974. Here's his quote. In the age of the technological fix, this country is heading for genetic and behavioral control of society. Who will exercise the control? Who will make the decisions about which genes are defective and which behavioral abnormal? Or maybe he meant abnormality. I don't know. Who will make decisions about the genetic worth of prospective human beings? Okay. When I went to prison, the concern and worry literally broke my mother's heart. She suffered a series of heart attacks and strokes and died in 1997. She knew I was innocent because I had been at home with my parents when the crime occurred. And over the years, things just wore her down. When you are in prison, if you are close to your family, your whole family's in prison. Real motherfucking talk. I think that's why, you know, I went off on one of my shows talking about the young black men who get caught up. I forgot who was I talking about. It was one of those rappers. Just look through my content. I generally, when I'm talking about rappers, and the especially if they're black or Hispanic, which they generally tend to be, I'm letting them know like you got to think about your family. Think about the people who love you, especially if you got kids. Or if you don't got no kids, think about that little cousin that look up to you. Think about, that little sister that needs your protection. Think about that niece that needs you. And if something happened to her, she could her, call on you for her protection. Okay. Like, I can't say it enough. Like black folks, like we need each other as a black woman, we need you. Okay. My brother's doing a bid right now. My other brother did a bid as well. And I cannot verbalize how heartbreaking it is. Um, Watching time go by without him. It's heartbreaking. I haven't heard from him in a while, especially with this pandemic, okay? And things like that, especially being in racist ass Kentucky, and where he is specifically, I won't talk about that, is extremely racist. Like, black people can't even be in the area that he's in after dark, okay? Like, legit cannot be where he is after fucking dark. So, I think that's something to consider. I don't think the men in our families really understand how valuable they are to the families that they're leaving behind when their pride and ego gets in the way of the bad decisions that they choose to make. And I know it's easier said than done, but I'm a person who's been there and done that. I'm the girl who, puts the money on the books and, the money on the phone and writing the letters and saying the prayers, okay? And it affects everyone who gives a fuck about you. You know what I'm saying? Them ratchet assholes and them bitch made ass niggas don't give a fuck about you. They ain't got nothing on your phone calls. They ain't got nothing on your commissary. So I just caution, especially our entertainers, to think twice about what you're putting out because these young black men are listening to you, and that energy you're putting out, they're on that frequency, and it lowers their vibration to make horrible ass decisions. So I think we need to reconsider some things. I just had to go there because that's a real ass statement. Your whole family does the time with you. And we 6 years down and we got six more to go. So I'm just saying. The burden of guilt is common coin in prison, but Calvin Johnson knows the crushing agony of innocence. The 25-year-old Atlanta resident had a bright future, a close knit family, many friends, and a wedding date when he was convicted of raping a white woman in 1983. You already, my look should say it all. I'm telling you. I'm saying. I'm just saying. Let me get my pen ready so I don't lose my spots. I'm just saying they ain't never did us right. Y'all gonna learn. He had never seen his victim before, but he was convicted. Although public hairs recovered from pubic hairs. Excuse me, let me get a little closer. I might need them 250s. Um, Pubic hairs recovered from her body did not match his. They came from an African. They did come from an African American man, and that apparently was enough. I still have faith in the justice system. I believed it would be a matter of time before officials realized they had made a mistake. I was really kind of naive. I didn't believe that I would be sentenced or convicted of crimes. Although the woman identified photographs of someone else as her assailant, and although he did not match key elements of her description, the actual rapist had only a mustache and Johnson wore a full beard. Wow. Johnson was convicted by an all white jury for 17 years. Johnson fought to survive in the hardest work camp in the state of Georgia. So they found a black man's pubic hairs and blamed him for the rape. That's fucked up. They worked in snake infested swamp waters up to my knees. He also had to stave off assailants. When you're in prison for sex offense, if you're not physically strong, the guys around you they'll pick at you. So I lifted weights and became a pretty good size. People left me alone. Johnson lost his youth, his fiance, and his naivete. But he says, I always believed that God would save me. Faith in God sustained his spirit. In 1986, Johnson finally found physical deliverance in DNA, which proved him innocent. He was 42 years old. Oh my God. They took all his youth away. Nearly all human cells contain genes, which in turn contain, oh, here we go, deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, the molecule that encodes life itself. DNA's genetic code is composed of building blocks called nucleotides. And this code dictates and directs the development of a fertilized egg through the process of protein manufacture so complex that they remain incompletely understood. DNA is passed from parents to children, and it determines or influences many traits, from your eye color to many disease propensities. There is DNA in nearly all your cells, but there are several types of DNA, and less than 1% codes for differing traits such as eye color, height, or disease susceptibility. Unless you are an identical twin or the product of another such multiple birth, your DNA is unique. No one else on the planet has your exact genetic code, although humans share a great many genetic similarities. Today, DNA fingerprinting, the technology enables scientists to identify distinctive genetic patterns. In Johnson's case, the DNA samples from his body ultimately proved that the pubic hairs and other biological evidence left behind the rapist were not his. At least three types of DNA fingerprinting are in use, but despite the terminology, none is accurate in identification method as matching a fingerprint. The most popular method at the time of Johnson's conviction, restriction fragment length polymorphism, or RFLP analysis, compares the DNA of two or more individuals, which varies by only 0.1%. That's one difference in 1,000, useful for establishing paternity or guilt. A newer form of DNA comparison, utilizing single nucleotide polymorphism, has rapidly outstripped RFLP. Anyone who doubts that genetic technology can be an important blessing for African Americans should consider its pivotal role in freeing Black men, such as Calvin Johnson. Excuse me. Johnson was freed. I'm hungry. Excuse me. Johnson was freed by the Innocence Project, the brainchild of OJ Dream Team members Barry Sheck and Peter Newfield, lawyers at the Cardozo School of Law in New York. So far, DNA evidence has helped them in the 15 to 20 similar projects they have inspired to exonerate more than 328 inmates, including Kirk Bloodsworth and Earl Washington Jr., who were sentenced to die in Maryland and Virginia, respectively. These are mostly African American men convicted of raping white women. And they wonder why we got an issue when Black men date white women. It's not necessarily the fact the bitch is a white girl. What it necessarily is the history of these bitches never telling the truth when our men are meant to suffer. Every time a Black man gets hurt, the first woman to cry is Black. Keep that in mind. Only 10% of reported sex assaults are allegations of white women attacked by Black men. Yet, most 54% of all convictions proven to be unjust involve African American men wrongfully convicted of assaulting white women. This is a crime that seems associated with many wrong convictions. So many men have been freed by DNA testing that laws ensuring prisoners' rights to DNA appeals have been passed in some states, including California, New York, and Illinois. Illinois declared a moratorium on capital punishment after an embarrassing string of investigations uncovered many innocent prisoners in its penal institutions. However, development of DNA technology is no, uh, oh my goodness. I need my phone. Y'all come over to YouTube. See you in a minute. I'm going to discard that. Because if you don't catch up, you get lost. The end. I need to know how to say it because I want to say pancreas or some shit. Some of y'all are so much smarter than me, and that's why I love y'all. But I don't know what this word says. Um, Panacea, a solution or remedy for all difficult disease. Panacea. Okay. However, deployment of DNA technology is no panacea. Her vocabulary is so on deck. She be making me want to go to school or back to school for something more important. Relatively few inmates can afford the requisite $5,000, the requisite $5,000, and the backlash triggered by the Illinois embarrassment was swift. Some cities, such as Lansing, Michigan, passed laws restricting the use of DNA evidence in inmate appeals. Then again, some criminals leave no testable materials behind. And according to Barry Sheck, even when biological evidence exists, 70% of the time it's allowed to deteriorate, is lost, or discarded during the decades in innocent person languages in jail. Human error sometimes sabotages genetic wisdom, and when courts ignore compelling DNA evidence, scientists and technicians in genetic laboratories have made errors and have even falsified DNA results. For example, Chicago laboratory worker Pamela Fish lied or made errors that bolstered at least one erroneous conviction, according to the forensic experts who reviewed her testimony before the release of inmate Don Willis. A study by the University of Michigan law professor Samuel L. Gross determined that tens of thousands of innocent people are trapped in jail. If we reviewed all prison sentences with the same level of care that we devote to death sentences, there would have been more than 28,000 non death row exonerations in the past 15 years rather than the 255 that in fact occurred. Mm, mm, mm. That's a goddamn shame. Hold on, y'all. You know how I gotta do? I gotta count it down. Let's see how many we got this time. It's a little less than yesterday. I knew it was 10. Anyways, even for freedmen such as Johnson, justice remains elusive. How do you compensate a man for co-signing him to spend his youth in hell for the loss of his friends, family, income, and a good name? States such as California offer a non-negotiable settlement of $100 for each day of unjust imprisonment. Okay, but two-thirds of those freed by DNA evidence get nothing, and money means nothing to some, such as Frank Lee Smith, a Fort Lauderdale man, exonerated by DNA evidence nearly 15 years after he was sent to death row and 11 months after he died there of cancer. Oh my God. Clearly, DNA testing is no substitute for justice. In fact, according to experts such as Newfield, the real significance is not that DNA got them out, but that DNA provides a window into the criminal and justice system to see what went wrong with the system to let so many innocent people be convicted. But DNA evidence has powerful uses beyond liberating the innocent. This is called Shades of Gadakta. The film Gadakta, Gadakta held a not too distant mirror up to the genetic dystopia in which human decisions and discretion are removed from all encompassing judgments about men's work. In this film, only one's DNA recognized and assessed by machines determine one's fate, leaving in character, personality, drive, and all intent and all sublime, sublimated to tyranny of the gene. The biometric dystopia of Gattaca doesn't exist yet, and perhaps it never will, but developments over the past few years invoke an unmistakable glimmer of recognition. The FBI, Secret Service, IRS, Social Security Administration, Census Bureau, and Department of Veterans Affairs all maintain extensive collections of genetic data. Since May 1998, sex offenders have been required to surrender DNA samples to federal databases. And today, every state maintains its own DNA database that contains the DNA profiles of felons and of others, including people merely suspected of crimes or even innocent people rounded up in the DNA sweeps. The samples of 450,000 convicts are stored with identifiers such as the person's name, description, criminal record, social security number, and image. The government has also sponsored the creation of national databases, such as the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, which, and the abbreviation CODIS, which stores DNA samples most without identifying information. CODIS went online in 1998 with samples from 8,000 convicted child molesters, and by 2001, it contained the profiles of 1.5 million felons. In 2002, the U.S. Attorney General ordered the FBI to expand CODIS, I'm going to call it CODIS, to 50 million profiles. And by 2004, CODIS stored 2.6 million samples containing the DNA of people convicted of almost any crime. In October 2005, the Senate Judiciary Committee approved a law which was pending when this book went to trial or to print to force anyone who is merely detained by federal authorities to provide DNA. And in August 2006, the database contained more than 3.5 million samples. The FBI predicts that CODIS will accommodate 50 million samples in the near future. Some scientists warn that the very DNA evidence that technology has freed hundreds of African American men like Johnson may soon be wielded by police to criminalize and convict Black and Hispanic men. From California to London, DNA data banking has also allowed the collection of evidence for convicted felons on the premise that those who have convicted have sacrificed some of their rights to privacy. But Troy Duster, a professor of sociology at Berkeley and the author of Backdoor to Eugenics, warned in 2001 the same technology that will the same technology that would exculpate people today is also being used to put people who have merely been stopped by the police into genetic bases. He is correct. In 2000, Miami police seeking a violent criminal described vaguely as Black or Hispanic stopped over 2,000 Black and Hispanic men on the street quickly, took a buccal swab from each, swabbing the interior of each man's cheek. The police now had samples of their DNA, accompanied by identifying information, suspect profiles, and each man was free to go for the time being. The samples were tested against DNA left by the rapist at the scene, but none of these men's DNA matched that of the putative assailant. Therefore, all these men have demonstrated their innocence, but police have stored their genetic data in a database to be tapped when they seek a perk. I'm sorry, God. Hold on. This database of innocent Black men and Hispanic men constitutes a collective presumption of guilt. When weighing the ethical and scientific unacceptability of this tactic, it is important to realize the term DNA fingerprinting is a misnomer. The genetic profile is not as specific as a fingerprint and cannot provide a unique identifier. The description of Black or Hispanic suspect is so vague that it yields a racial dragnet. I knew that's what she was going to say. Not a description of a suspect. Some rare differences that allow one to differentiate individuals based upon a genetic profile become less rare when one looks only within ethnic or kinship groups. DNA profiling has been questionably imposed upon white men too, but with important differences. For example, the ACLU of Massachusetts denounced DNA testing as a serious intrusion on personal privacy. When police in Truro, Massachusetts, used it in investigating the 2002 killing of white fashion writer Krista Worthington. The ACLU also cited the technology's failures in sites such as Baton Rouge and Virginia when DNA samples were coerced from up to 800 area men, most of whom were white, in contrast to the thousands taken from Black and Hispanic men. The ACLU also argued that the 7,000 forensic DNA samples tested in sweeps have resulted in only one arrest, making DNA sweeps a very expensive and inefficient way of targeting suspects. This is partly because guilty suspects typically refuse to give a sample even under considerable pressure. It is the innocent who allow themselves to be cajoled or bullied into a buccal swab. Mm-mm. Go like this. A DNA sweep targeting all Caucasian men, in which police coerce men into supplying DNA to eliminate themselves as suspects, then store it for use next time they may seek a criminal, would be as ethically repugnant as a similar sweep of Black men. However, in Truro, the donors were not exclusively white and were not targeted on the basis of skin alone, so racial bias was not a factor. Truro police asked all local men over 18 to provide samples and recorded their various races. What's more, the police agreed to destroy the Turo samples after the collections, unlike Miami and Washington, D.C., where the police sought DNA only for men in color. Truro sweat the Truro suite was still a privacy violation. Many white men felt pressure to get samples and complained that the demand for DNA sample violated Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Moreover, a black man was arrested for Worthington's murder in 2005 under troubling circumstances. According to the Boston Herald, this suspect, who had an extensive criminal history of violent crimes against women, had given the police permission to take his DNA in April 2002, but police declined to do so until March 2004. During the 3 years it took them to take, analyze, and act on his DNA analysis, the DNA dragnet of Troll's 800 adult men was completed. Some now complain that their privacy was invaded for no reason by DNA testing because police have failed to investigate an obviously promising suspect or even analyze his DNA sample. California, too, is forcibly taking DNA samples from people presumed innocent, people who have been arrested but not tried and convicted. Defenders of the practice often say that taking and storing such sample is no more intrusive than the common practice of taking a suspect's fingerprints. It is true that fingerprints are taken of arrested persons without too much protest that the innocent are being stigmatized. But again, DNA markers are not fingerprints. They are less specific and far more invasive. In practice, a fingerprint is not forensically infallible means of identification, but it verifies a person's identity with enough accuracy to satisfy the legal system. However, one's DNA contains intimate, including one's wait, intimate information not only about one's identity, but about one's developing Huntington's disease or hard to cure cancer. Besides harboring the markers for 4,000 disease risks, DNA also contains information about the health and identity of one's forebears and descendants. While a sample of your DNA, a person can predict certain disease and disorder probabilities for you and for your children. George Annas, a law professor and yeah, and bioethicist at Boston University let me bring you closer, has referred to one's DNA profile as a future coded diary. And with the completion of the Human Genome Project, the code has essentially been broken. Therefore, taking the fingerprints of an arrestee and taking a sample of his DNA are not comparable acts. The latter is far more intrusive and revealing, but far less likely to yield a uniquely definitive identification. Ooh, sorry, y'all. In the United States, laws prevent the federal government from retaining DNA samples of the innocent, but the states are doing just this. In 1994, police took samples from 160 black men in Ann Arbor, Michigan, many of whom complained that they had been coerced by police officers who ignored their alibis and threatened to prosecute them if they refused to submit. San Diego police similarly pressed 800 black men in the doctor to which a serial killer described only as dark skin. Black Ann Arbor, I'm sorry, y'all, hold on. Black Ann Arbor residents complained that the police tactics bordered on harassment and abuse, but the men who were approached in Truro often cited subtler peer pressure and vague fears that police should scrutinize them more heavily if they refused to give a sample. Damn. Sorry, y'all. I am me as sleepy though. It's just me and Robo Bear, ain't it? Okay, that should definitely help. Whew. I'm sorry, y'all. The girl needs something to drink. Got some of that 5 or 0 calorie, 5 calorie tea. Ooh, shit. I don't know what y'all think about that so far. Let me know in the comments whenever you watch this. Sound like some old bullshit to me. Let me let these eye drops kick in. I was getting sleepy, y'all. That Jamie Foxx album been in my head since I woke up. Hold on, y'all gotta roll my eyes around. It was dry. I feel like I could see a little bit better too. I so can't wait till we done with this book. I might quit y'all for real. Excuse me. Darn, I couldn't get them out. In mid-April 2001, Syracuse University's Lubin Center hosted a program on forensic genetic technologies, moderated by television journalist Catherine Cryer, and with a panel of experts that included NYU sociology professor Troy Duster and Howard Safir, the police commissioner of New York City under Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Safir's new career as a proponent of high technology security includes the promulgation of his view that police should soon be allowed to use brave new genetic technologies to stop people on the street, take a buccal swab with a portable device, run the database off satellite, and use the portable computers to see if rather they have a hit. Girl, bye. Because they would be, with the way these racist police are, they'll be making up all kind of shit. Such on-the-spot DNA testing is not yet reality, but several biotech technology firms are endeavoring to figure to perfect portable solutions that can allow stops to a person, obtain quick DNA sample, and check it against a database in minutes. One such firm located in San Diego is called Nanogen. It utilizes single nucleotide polymers such as DNA fragments that are sites of genetic difference distinctive enough to identify a subject. Nanogen can put SNPs on a microchip the size of a stamp, technology that scientists have taken calling SNPs on chips or analyzing and comparing small areas of DNA called short tandem repeats or STRs. A police officer armed with DNA from a buccal swab can very speedily check through 13 STRs within minutes. However, some critics argue that 13 STRs is too few for reliable identification. Police outfitted with portable computers will be able to access the DNA data banks to, to screen the profiles of thousands of men. The FBI felons database has samples from 8,000 unsolved crime scenes, and state law enforcement has accrued approximately 620,000 samples from lawbreakers, including those suspected or convicted of minor crimes. Every state now maintains genetic databases that are matched that that are matched to genetic samples taken from crime scenes, such as blood traces, in order to facilitate finding the person who has committed the crime. Cryer echoed the sentiments of many present when she asked why being in the genetic database would be a problem for innocent Black men. If he is not guilty, what is the problem for a man in the database? He has nothing to worry about, but he does. Multiple levels of bias feed the all Black and Hispanic databases, and lawsuits such as Pamela Fish's case cited earlier already have verified that DNA evidence is no more immune to fraudulent or incompetent manipulation than is any other evidence. Then, two, there is the issue of collective stigmatization. If only men of color are in the database, only men of color become suspects, and only they can be convicted. Databases that exclude white men, the numerical majority group, will miss most criminals. As the American Criminal Law Review points out, optimal effectiveness, however, would require a universal DNA data matches would be missed. Although, wait, I missed it. It would be more efficient than one based upon skin color. It is also ethically unacceptable because it would necessitate coercion. The DNA sweeps from Miami to London to Truro have not met with varying levels of resistance and resentment, and so cannot be described as voluntary. Will the novel DNA fingerprinting technology lead to the imprisonment of more African American men that have been freed because of it? This technology's benevolent face has been seen more often, but it has another sinister visage. This dual nature holds true for almost every application of genetic science to African American health and welfare. Historically, every boon appears to have been accompanied by a stigmatizing threat to health or freedom. For American blacks, genetics has always wielded as a two-edged sword. Now, I'm going to tell y'all this right now today. Let me look through here right quick because I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I will. I think we're done. For real. Hold on. We're actually done. Oh shit. Hold on. Let me check something. Because I was about to be like, y'all gotta read the last song. Girl, we done. Hold on. It's the coldest winter that we ain't done with. Hold up. And it got pictures from the chapters we just read. Hold on, wait, because I'm not reading the epilogue and the outro, and I'm not doing that. Hold on. Wait a minute, girl. I was gonna be like, forget y'all. Let me, let me find out we done. And I'm about to quit y'all already. Girl, this is the last damn chapter, chapter 13. Where does it end? Oh, 14. Let me check. I want to check this. That's 14. 14, that short. I might do that in one night just to be done. 15. Girl, we damn near done. I might as well finish it. I'll finish these two books. The Coldest Winter is easier to read than this one. So, girl, we got 3 more chapters left. I ain't gonna quit on y'all, but I was today. Believe that. I was. I think I still might. 13. Wednesday. Oh, and I can't read it next week because I'm gonna have my baby all week. So, okay. Yeah, because y'all not over here like that. So I think, yeah, I'm not about to keep stringing this one. Plus, I got my garden. So check one too. I'm gonna put it in the title, last chapter, and y'all can read the rest on your own. The last 3 chapters, okay? And then we'll just finish the coldest winter ever because that's easier to read. Because I got a garden to work on and I got to be an auntie too. So yeah, this is the last chapter. As a matter of fact, the coldest winter ever next week is gonna be that last chapter too. So I'll make it be known next week on this chapter, last chapter. because I don't have enough traffic on here to be dedicated to it like this. And it just is what it is. And I'm gonna just keep it a buck. As a matter of fact, once we get to this, oh, here we go. Once we get to this one, it's a done data. I'm not about to be sitting up here doing that, girl. No, it's not. It's just not enough. And I'm so sorry for. I'm not sorry, but I am for the Care Bears who's really with the shits. Now I could do a video and a briefing for you guys regarding the last three chapters because I'm going to read them in my own time, but I don't have enough traffic to just sit up here and just keep reading like this because I don't have enough involvement to for me to keep pushing. You know what I'm saying? And that's just really how I feel like right now. I really feel like I could be working on my garden, and I really love and appreciate my five Care Bears that be down to the ground every day. Every Tuesday or Wednesday and Thursday, but it just it's not where it needs to be. So I'm gonna wrap it up to the end of this part of the chapter, and I'm gonna call it a day. Like we done read almost the whole fucking book. We really only got two chapters left. But the fact of the matter is my nephew is gonna be here for a week. He's 7 years old. I'm not gonna be able to sit still for no 2 hours reading to some adults, okay? With him in the background. That's just not right. And I'm the cool auntie, like, and we got shit to do. We gotta go to Dave and Buster's. We gotta work on this garden. Okay, I do fun shit with my nephew, and I'm trying to take him to this other arcade. So I'm just trying to fact. Yeah, as a matter of fact, once I get to the end of this one, I'm out of here. What are you talking about? I'm about to keep sitting and being up in here. So where was I? Okay, short and done. Samples from 8,000 unsolved crimes. Oh, I already did that page. Oh, have met with variant or resistance. Well, the novel DNA. Oh, yeah, the two-edged sword. So, sickle cell misstep. African Americans are no strangers to genetic innovation, but unfortunately, genetic therapy has long been sabotaged by racial myths and bad science. The agenda driven nature of much genetic research with African Americans has rendered many Blacks wary of genetic science. One of the most infamous examples within recent memory has been the family of troubled genetic initiatives surrounding sickle cell disease. Chapter 6 described how in 1910, cardiologist James B. Herrick, MD, and Ernest E. Irons first identified the thin, elongated sickle cell shape. Um, I'm not going that far. Ooh. Red blood cells, a desperately ill 22-year-old dental student from Grenada. A year later, a Virginia medical journalist published a description of 25-year-old Black woman with similar symptoms. Soon, reports of African Americans with sickle cell anemia, a constellation of dire conditions ascribed to misshapen sickled blood cells, began to flood medical journals. When people with the disorder are exposed to environmental insults such as low oxygen environments, the red blood cells deform into a sickle shape and become adhesive, sabotaging the cell's ability to carry sufficient oxygen and causing them to block small blood vessels, including capillaries. These events trigger excruciatingly painful episodes known as sickle cell crises. A sickle cell crisis can generate not merely anemia, but also bleeding, ulcer, strokes, a heart attack, or the loss of limbs and tissues, depending upon the location of the compromised blood cells. Thus, physicians often prefer the sickle cell disease, pointing out that most of the sufferers' worst medical crises have little to do with anemia. By 1920, an erroneous belief had become firmly entrenched that sickle cell disease was a racial condition that struck only African Americans. However, it also affects people from Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and West African regions, but not those from South America, African, and East Asian regions. Mm. After the supposed post war conquest of infectious disease via antibiotics, and after the discovery of DNA's double uh, helical structure in 1951, genetics gained primary as the permanent mode of understanding and attacking disease. In 1949, sickle cell anemia became the first molecular disease to be identified. Scientists learned that sickle cell anemia was the worst of several sickling cell disorders and that it struck 1 in every 400 African American newborns. They also knew that sickle cell disease and a slew of closely related blood disorders called hemoglobinopathies struck not only blacks but also persons of other races. For example, one such blood disease, uh, thalassa- thalassemia, affects people of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and African extraction. But sickle cell anemia's identity as Black disease was so firmly entrenched that Blacks with the thalassemia were still often misdiagnosed with sickle cell. Sickle cell disease is recessive. A person must carry two of the recessive genes for sickle cell disease to develop the illness. People with only one sickle cell gene are said to be um, hetero heterozygotes are carriers who are essentially well. But if two heterozygotes for sickle cell disease marry, their offspring run a 1 in 4 chance of developing the disease. If a carrier marries a person without the gene, none of their children will develop a sickle cell disease, but their children run a 1 in 2 chance of becoming carriers themselves. Damn. Carriers of sickle cell disease are sometimes referred to as having the sickle cell trait, but despite the connotation of illness that the word trait carries, they are well. They are well. By the 1960s, workplaces instituted genetic screening, often ostensibly to protect vulnerable employees by avoiding their placement in work environments that can trigger illness such as sickle cell crises. The federal government supported initiatives that encourage widespread genetic screening of sickle cell, and African Americans themselves pushed for many of these initiatives to test for counsel people at risk for sickle cell disease. So there's no doubt that many of the projects were well intentioned. However, some were not. And in many cases, good intentions paved the medical road to perdition. Sickle cell screening created a huge problem, recalls Vernelia Randolph, professor of Dayton University. Why not if they're wealthy? Airlines, for example, said pilots with the trait could not fly. Why not if they're healthy? In 1968 to 69, doctors at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, grew concerned that Army basic training was suddenly proving more than usually hazardous, even deadly. Within 11 months, 4 recruits had collapsed and died suddenly, all of them black. Even more alarming were the autopsy results, which showed the men's red blood cells were low. Were red blood cells were now sickle shaped. The soldiers were black, and the high altitude of the boot camp 4,000 feet, suggested that the deaths might have been due to sickle cell disease crisis triggered by the low oxygen environment characteristic of high altitude. The New England Journal of Medicine reported on the men's deaths, noted the sickle cells didn't necessarily mean that the men had sickle cell disease, but the misshapen cells could have been a consequence, not the cause of their deaths. When the National Academy of Sciences studied the deaths, it could neither rule out sickle cell anemia nor prove it had killed the men. Wow, that's ill. But the U.S. Force Academy rushed to judgment, promptly issuing a directive barring the admission of all the sickle cell carriers. Damn. Oh, man. Yeah. Carriers were permanently grounded and were banned for co-piloting and were reduced to ground jobs. It was worth noting that by banning black carriers from admission, the Academy was effecting a large scale restoration of its long-standing, nakedly race-based ban on blacks entering the academy, but now it could offer the rationale of protecting them. Strangely, scientists as well as laypersons confuse well sickle cell carriers with the homozygotes who had both genes for sickle cell and therefore had the disease. However, this confusion was no accident and resulted in profits for orthopharmaceutical company of McNeil Laboratories, the company that sold the so-called sickle cell screening test, which did not differentiate between the sickle cell trait and the sickle cell disease. Ortho was promoting and distributing a test it called Codex that could not discriminate between sickle cell carriers and people with the disease. That is, Codex detected the presence of the gene, but not rather one whose two genes existed. In order to market the test, employers, military hospitals, and government extended to carriers the same advice and restrictions that applied to people genuinely ill with the sickle cell anemia. Otherwise, these agencies would have had to admit that the test was extremely limited therapeutic value because it could not tell a sick person from a well one. The National Institute of Health, hospitals, and private organizations disseminated brochures and booklets equating carrier status with the disease, and millions of well black people were informed they were ill and genetically tainted. Some were told that they had a life expectancy of 20 years. The very first sentence of the preamble of the National Sickle Cell Anemia Control Act, enacted in 1972 to foster sickle cell research, screening, counseling, and education, is untrue. 2 million Americans suffer from sickle cell disease. Actually, 2 million people were healthy carriers, and fewer than 100,000 Americans suffer from sickle cell anemia. The erroneous claim, coupled with its constantly reinforced perception of sickle cell disease black disorder, left Americans with the mistaken impression that a good portion, 1 in 12, of African Americans suffered from sickle cell anemia. The perception of sickle cell, oh, sorry, my nose itch. The perception of sickle cell heterozygosity as disease state is an eloquent illustration of ethnocent- ethnocentrism because far from being unhealthy, this carrier status confers the distinct biological advantage of immunity to the deadliest strand of malaria. This helps, oh, we learned about that in chapter 3. This helps sickle cell carriers in malarious areas to survive. At the 8th International Congress of Genetics in 1949, evolutionary biologist JBS Haldane first proposed that people with one gene for sickle cell disease were more resistant to attacks by the sporoza that cause malaria. In parts of Africa and other countries where malaria carrying mosquitoes thrive, people who have one gene for sickle cell anemia and one gene for normal hemoglobin are not only healthier than the people with sickle cell anemia, but also heterozygote for sickle cell anemia protects one from invasion by the deadly strain of malaria in several ways. A form of the malaria parasite, the Plasmodium, infects a person's red blood cells, but heterozygotes, the Plasmodium causes only the infected red blood cells to sickle cell by making the cell environment more acidic. This increased acidity in turn makes the hemoglobin lose oxygen, rather further escalates the sickling of the infected cells. However, the resulting lack of oxygen also depletes the infected cells of potassium, which kills the malaria parasites. Any surviving parasites are picked off by the person's immune system, and the sickle cells are taken out of circulation, destroyed, and eliminated from the body along with the parasites. The unaffected red blood cells do not sickle, and the person suffers neither from sickle cell disease nor from malaria. In malarious environments, sickle cell heterozygotes are 50% more likely to survive and to reproduce. Uh, to reproduce than their neighbors with normal hemoglobin. Whoa, this is called heterozygote advantage. It helps explain why the common denominator for groups carrying the sickle cell gene is not being black, but living in proximity to malaria bearing Anopheles mosquito. Another genetic disease that also are thought to confer a heterozygote advantage include cystic fibroids, the most common genetic disease among people of European descent. Oh, what? Cystic fibroids? Fibrosis? I thought that was black women stuff among European descent, which protects against a fatal dehydration of cholera and typhoid. Uh, and scientists have suggested that heterozygotes for Tay Sachs disease, which preferentially strikes, oh my God, um, Jews, okay? Many enjoy increased protection against tuberculosis. Today, the United States sees only about 1,000 cases of malaria annually. So the heterozygote advantage is not terribly useful to a North American, except for travelers to malarious areas, and as an object lesson in the interplay among genetics, disease, and culture. African Americans were among those confused by the erroneous medical advice the government was dispensing. Many states mounted compulsory genetic screening programs, which many blacks welcomed, but which caused others, including genetic experts, to feel stigmatized. Excuse me, it's my allergies. For example, James Bowman, an African American professor of the genetics University of Chicago, was a lone voice crying out in the genetic wilderness when he was invited to address a 1971 Black Panthers event. Their sickle cell screening was being conducted by community leaders who warned that anyone who tested positive could expect to live only 20 years longer. Bowman forcefully objected that the testing was unable to identify the genuinely ill, and that in any case, the clinical picture was far less dire. Despite Bowman's credentials and protests, the black and white organizers persisted in erroneous testing and counseling. 17 states enacted single cell screening laws, often in response to requests from African Americans. But Black Americans did not clamor for workplace screenings, which threatened privacy and raised questions that could create a genetic underclass of workers. In 1971, almost 900 diseases were known to be genetic, yet screening tests could identify the carriers of only 50 genetic diseases. However, screening for sickle cell was the genetic test performed most often by employers. By 1975, tens of thousands had been screened for Tay Sachs, and thalassemia, but 500,000 blacks had been screened for sickle cell disease. Um, in the Name of Eugenics, A Social History of Genetics by Daniel Cleves, no one argued seriously for the screening of every possible parent, but some did urge the screening of people from groups at comparatively high risk for particular genetic diseases, notably blacks. The National Institute of Health Policies and publications focused exclusively on African Americans, solidifying sickle cell anemia in American psyche as a black disease. Unfortunately, the government policies still confuse the disease state with being a carrier. Such screenings were performed in mass at a variety of sites in assembly line fashion with agenda driven, inaccurate counseling. When screening revealed that a person carried the trait for sickle cell disease, that information was dumped upon her. She was informed she was sick, given a brochure that erroneously equated the disease with the trait, then often dismissed without further support or answers, expecting, except for the one piece of advice that was always dispensed, the inadvisability of marriage between two people with the trait because they could produce children with sickle cell anemia. This was often the main informational point of the screening to identify affected people so they would know not to have children. Such advice led many African Americans to accuse genetic counselors and counseling programs of genocide, especially after 1973. That was the year uh, prenatal tested of the uh, amniotic fluid for life threatening disorders, then for genetic defects, and later for sickle cell anemia. This was also the year that Roe versus Wade gave American women access to legal abortion on demand. Oh my goodness, genetic counselors who had dispensed pointed advice along with diagnoses since the 1950s were supposed merely to provide diagnosis and disease information, but they still practiced virtually unregulated and many recommended abortion on the basis of testing that could not discern the trait from the disease. For at risk couples who conceived at that time, the advice recalls Vernelia Randall. The advice was pregnancy termination. Some view these attempts to limit fertility of blacks. Discrimination among single cell carriers has been slow to dissipate, lagging well behind scientific knowledge. The U.S. Air Force Academy's admission bar and grounding of heterozygous pilots, for example, only ended in 1981 by lawsuit. Nope. Today, unscrupulous employers continue to wield genetic screening, but they now do surreptitiously without employees' informed consent. In 2001, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission charged Northern Santa Fe Railroad with running genetic tests on workers who had filed claims for carpal tunnel syndrome. If tests shown them they had any genetic predisposition to the condition, the railroad could have argued that it should not be held liable. Some lawsuits spawned by such abuses alleged racial bias. Perhaps the most egregious was the case of Norman Bloodsaw versus Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, a research center that the federal government ran in cooperation with the University of California. In 98, 172 employees, all but one of them black, sued LBL when they learned that they had secretly been tested for syphilis, pregnancy, and sickle cell trait without their knowledge. That the blood and urine that they had supplied during the required physical examination would be tested in this manner. These tests were insulting as well as intrusive, and were illegal under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But what is particular what is particularly disquieting is the lack of scientific sophistication, the laboratory demonstrated in testing only Black employees for the sickle cell trait. Scientists should have known that not only Blacks were at risk, and they should have known that a carrier status imparted no reasonable disability risk. The blatantly racial nature of screening was suggested when plaintiffs learned that only white employees have been tested for the venereal disease was a white man married to a Black woman. In August 2000, the University of California settled the 2.2 million lawsuit brought by these Black employees. The privacy of these workers was illegally assailed, and they could have been unfairly stigmatized. There is another reason that being tested for genetic issues without one's consent is damaging. The price of genetic knowledge can be intolerably high. The health information contained in one's genes can give clues to prevention and self care. Right. But such information can also generate futile anxiety, okay? And lay one open to layers of medical and financial discrimination. If you know of a genetic condition and lie about it to your insurance company, they can refuse to cover you. Observe Marion. She's a doctor. If you learn you are at risk for a disease that cannot be treated, the information can be worse than useless. The knowledge will not enable you to protect yourself, and you will suffer mental anguish over an illness that you may never acquire. Employers who refuse to hire people when they learn of genetic indicators for a disease may regulate them to unemployable biological underclass. And that's not just concern for those who with known genetic disorders, because everyone's genome harbors a few bad apples. Genes that could but do not necessarily indicate a health problem. The more people are forced to reveal about their genome, the greater the risk of suffering genetic discrimination. Currently, Black people are most likely to be subjected to such testing, in large part because testing for sickle cell disease is the most common genetic screen used by employers and insurer, insurers. A 2000 congressional report predicts that such discrimination may become widespread as employers are pressured to contain healthcare costs. Already, Black women who have higher than normal risk of the BRCA gene, which confers as much as 70% higher risk of breast cancer, fear their insurers employers may discover their status should they seek genetic testing. Some women seek gene testing on their own and pay for it out of their pockets because they don't want their insurance company to know. My other genetic tests preclude African Americans from the desirable jobs in the near future. Consider, for example, that a genetic mutation affecting resistance to chemotherapy occurs more often in in African populations than in Caucasian or Asian populations. In 98 research study of African Americans and Hispanic living in Manhattan revealed that they harbor a genetic variant that places them at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease than whites. African Americans are more likely than whites to be healthy carriers of COS6 phosphate dehydro hydro hydranase syndrome, which can cause the loss of red blood cells and affects many medical risks and medication reactions. If this carrier status is detected by tests and is miscategorized as a disease state, will Blacks be barred from desirable jobs? Of course. Each of these genetic complements appears in other ethnic groups as well, but the rates and thus the risk are higher among African Americans. There is also the widespread misconception that simply having a disease gene means you have the disease. This is not so. Most common adult onset genetically influenced diseases, such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and cancer, typically result from several genetic factors, not from one single gene. It often it often also takes environmental triggers such as obesity. nutrient deficiency, exposure to noxious chemicals, for example, to cause the disease to manifest. What's more, genes interact to temper one another's effects, and all these factors complicate determining who is at risk. And they are so hamper scientists' attempts to attempts at gene therapy. Wow. And that's what I said yesterday. And this is where I'm going to leave off and I'll read the rest on my own. That's what I said yesterday. They're saying all these things, but they don't look at the environmental factors. But luckily for us, Harriet A. Washington did. Okay. So, yeah, that's why I'm doing my best to get this weight off me, and I can't be with y'all all day, every day. So, in the thing, I'm gonna let y'all know this is the last chapter, but I think we are gonna finish the coldest winter ever. This is a hard read. This is something I need to read on my own. We done got through more than half of the book. There's literally only three left. You can read those three on your own. Okay, that's it, and that's all. And I made my decision there, honey. Now I know we could fly through the coldest winter because it's an easy read. You know, winter talks like how we talk, and we could keep it pushing. We ain't got to go through a whole bunch of medical terms and scientific terms and all of that. Okay, but just for my black part, I had to read it one time. So you know, for those who slide through late and those who don't or do or whatever, let me know what you think. I hope you check out the playlist. If you don't want to read it on your own, make sure you hit the like. Support that sister. She put in a lot of work in that book. Okay, support your girl. I put in a lot of work reading that motherfucker. Okay, which I will do. I won't leave you hanging in the dust. Excuse my allergies. It's that time, but I won't leave you in the dust. I will give you a briefing and add it to the playlist for chapters 13, 14, and 15. And that's it. I'm not going to read the outro. I mean, she's using a fancy word for outro. I'm not about to read all that. But I will refer to the last three chapters and let you know some of the stories and what it's about. Okay. And it's going to be probably an hour, hour and a half long video, which I don't know when I'm going to do it, but it will be soon. But it'll give me enough time to research those stories and present something good to you. Okay. Um, and besides that, the other reasoning behind that is I done started my garden. Um, I'm starting another YouTube channel, and we need to wrap up this book. Like I got things going on. I got to work on this game that I'm working on. I got to work on a lot of things, and I got to study for my test so I can get my hair license, so I can be a fucking boss out this bitch. You feel me? So anyway, um, for the Robo Bear, who's in here? Oh, well, Robo Bear, in case in point, I can't be spending all this time if only 2, 3, 4 people's gonna be up in here. So that's another reason why I'm starting another channel. So yeah, my content is not for everybody apparently. So with all that being said, share if you care, share if you dare, especially if you're a Care Bear, and peace over here, grease and all that jazz. Out this bitch. Peace, man.